Okay, can you hear me? Cool. Hello, and welcome to our event, Preserve Your Treasures. We're celebrating National Preservation Week with the American Library Association. Preservation Week is described as Preservation Week is described as Preservation Week inspires action to preserve personal, family, and community collections in addition to library, museum, and archive collections. It also raises awareness of the role libraries and other cultural institutions play in providing ongoing preservation, education, and information. I want to thank the University of Nevada, Reno Special Collections and University Archives for helping us promote this event and co-sponsoring the event. So let's get started. To introduce today's presenter, Elspeth Olson is currently the Outreach and Public Services Archivist in Special Collections and University Archives at the University of Nevada, Reno. She has a master's degree in History and Library Science and previously worked at the American Bookbinders Museum, Stanford University, and as a freelance archivist and historian. Elspeth has been working in archives since an undergraduate internship in the summer of 2005. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. May the 4th be with you, of course, have to say that. As Catherine said, my name is Elspeth Olson. I am a member of Temple Sinai, and I work in Special Collections and University Archives at the University Libraries at UNR. I'm going to walk you through some basics today for looking after items in your personal collections that you may want to preserve for future generations. I have some generalized advice that's applicable to a lot of different kinds of materials, as well as some special issues and considerations for certain categories of things. I will also be offering some resources for further learning and finding experts toward the end. So if you have things that have very specific needs, those may give you some good leads on taking care of them. I also want to be really clear on one point from the get-go. I am going to be looking at your physical items today. I'm not going to be recommending that you scan everything and disregard the originals. Preservation and conservation-wise, paper is still the most stable storage medium we have because we understand how it ages over generations. If any of you have tried to open a Word file, for instance, from even 15 years ago, you may find that your computer has a hard time reading the file. Digital copies are a good backup, and I do recommend having backups stored in different formats and in different locations. In libraries and archives for a while, we've discussed a concept that we call LOCKSS, which stands for lots of copies keeps stuff safe. So if you have your physical copy, maybe you have a digital copy stored to your hard drive and one stored in the cloud. Maybe you send photocopies or extra prints to family members so that everybody has a version of this if it's very important. But today I'm going to be talking about looking after your originals. I want to start briefly by introducing myself as a professional, though, so you have a bit more reason to think you should listen to me. I've been working in academic libraries for 20 years as of next month. Starting as a student employee at my alma mater. I worked in the music library, the earth sciences library, and for about 7 years on and off in various capacities in their special collections and university archives. I have bachelor's and master's degrees in history, focusing first on the cultural history of early modern Europe and narrowing that further to the history of books as objects. And I spend a lot of time examining book bindings, signs of previous use and owner's marks, and documenting the condition of the pages and covers themselves. In 2013, I finished a second master's degree in library and information studies at the University of British Columbia, and have since worked in a wide variety of positions. Those include as the solo librarian and archivist for the American Bookbinders Museum, which is a small museum in San Francisco focused on the impact of the Industrial Revolution on book production, very interesting little microcosm of mechanization. And as an oral historian for 2 different historical societies in the Bay Area, and as a freelance archivist helping individuals preserve and inventory personal collections of photographs, documents, and recordings. I'm also the self-appointed historian for my extended family, as you can see in these photos here of my setup when I was still living back home. I moved to Reno in 2019 for a job at UNR and have settled into a role doing their public-facing work, like exhibits, reference, and teaching classes that come to the archives. That's enough about me. So, common kinds of things people have in their personal collections can include photographs, artwork, documents, wearable things like textiles and jewelry, books, of course. I've brought some from my personal collection here if people want to look at them later, and analog audio and video recordings. I will begin with my general advice for just about anything that you have that you want to preserve. I also want to make sure I'm defining my terms here. In archives and libraries, preservation and conservation are different things, though they are related. Preservation involves the preventive measures taken to avoid or slow damage or natural deterioration, whereas conservation is repair and restoration after the damage has occurred. There are three things to keep an eye on for just about anything that you have. The first, of course, is light exposure. This picture here is what happens when you store your bookshelves in direct sunlight. The entirety of that cover should be dark green, and as you can see, the spine has gone to a lovely shade of ochre yellow. That is not what's supposed to happen. And as anyone who's had upholstered furniture or curtains in direct sunlight and start rotting or just become so fragile that if you sneeze too hard near them, they turn to dust, you know the damage that sunlight can do. This also happens to photographs, fading with extended light exposure. You either want to ensure that you're putting these items in places that get little to no natural light, or you're storing them in places that mostly remain dark. Photographs, being light sensitive by nature, are particularly difficult to manage with light. So if you have old photographs that you want to have on display, I recommend scanning them and using a modern print for your wall or mantelpiece display. That way, if the print fades, you still have the original. It's safe and sound. It also provides you with this digital copy, just in case. Again, lots of copies. Book spines are also very prone to what the professionals call sunning. That's this. So be aware of that. And the fabric can become very fragile as a result of extended UV exposure. So things like UV film on your windows, if you're feeling particularly worried about these things, not that hard to do, just kind of messy. It involves a lot of water and scraping to get air bubbles out, but we do those on things like exhibit cases all the time. Another thing is humidity and temperature. We are in a very dry climate here in Reno, though not today where it is drizzling. So, you know, things change. But you might think that moisture is not really a problem out here. Thing is, materials acclimate to their environment. So different molds can grow in just about any conditions. There are molds that grow in Antarctica and the ice. There are those that grow in desert climates. So you want to be really careful. The big thing is fluctuation. We do experience significant annual temperature ranges from pretty cold in the winter to quite hot in the summer. So if your home doesn't have any kind of climate control or has limited to no insulation, like some of the older buildings might have, you want to be sure that your precious items are protected from that wide-ranging fluctuation. So a central area of your home, take things out of basements and attics, and away from things like outside walls, water heaters, steamy showers is most likely to be stable in terms of both temperature and humidity. So somewhere in the middle of your house with a nice closet can be a very good place for these things. I know I sound like I'm promoting just putting them away out of sight, but if you want things to last long term, maybe they're not on display permanently. The other thing is handling. Because we do want to be able to make use of these things. That's the whole point of preserving them, is we want to still have them be usable. And one of the big things that people are surprised by when they come to do research in the archives is that we usually don't ask them to wear gloves. I'm afraid the movies have lied to you. The gloves have fallen out of favor in archives and libraries in the last 20 years or so. It can vary a little bit depending on what you're handling, but for the most part, studies in the last few decades have shown that those ubiquitous white cotton gloves actually pose more of a risk to the materials than they prevent, largely because you can't feel what you're doing. So if you're trying to turn pages that are fragile, you're more likely to catch on them or accidentally rip things. They also pick up dirt like crazy and they spread it around. So if there's, dormant mold or mildew on something, or something is just very dirty, you're going to be contaminating other items potentially. And as it turns out, leather-bound books actually like the oils in our skin. If you have good quality leather furniture or shoes or belts or things like that, you would oil them to keep them safe. You tend not to do that with book bindings, and so they desiccate and dehydrate to the point where they start to turn powdery. This is something that we call red rot. It's not contagious or anything. It's just really gross to deal with and makes a mess. Leaves little stains on everything that they touch. So you just want to be careful handling these things and, handle your leather-bound books as much as you want. It's good for them. In general, I advise against gloves in most situations. We want clean, dry hands in the archives. But in a couple cases, if you want to wear gloves, for instance, if you're handling photographic film or prints, if you're handling things made of metal, or anything that you're kind of worried about touching with bare hands, I recommend going to the drugstore and picking up some latex or nitrile gloves. They're thin enough that you can still feel what you're doing, but they protect your hands and the materials. Please just know that if you're wearing them for a while, your hands will get very sweaty and it feels really gross. I've done that. I don't enjoy it, but it is sometimes the necessary step to take. Now, let's move on to talk about some things at a category-focused level. A couple slides here on photographs. When I'm asked in casual conversation about the kinds of things people can do to look after their family records, the first thing I urge is to put time and effort into labeling your photos as soon as possible. Names, dates, any contextual information about locations or events that you can remember. Much like planting a tree, the best time was several years ago. The second best time is now. It really, really helps future generations when there are clear labels on things so that we know who they are. Sit down. It's also a great way to get informal oral history with older relatives. You sit down with them, turn on the recording app on your phone, and ask for help identifying old family photos. So the one on the left here is from our negatives from the Reno Gazette Journal photo collection at UNR. We have the negatives and sleeves. I'll be talking about that in a minute. The two on the right are actually from my extended family. As you can see, we know who the one in the middle is with the fantastic beard, but we do not know specifically who the one on the far right is. It may be labeled in the back, but also the labels are in Cyrillic cursive, and we can't necessarily read that. So that's another part of the problem. Now, with negatives, I do recommend wearing gloves to handle negatives so that you can avoid getting your fingerprints on them. Those can permanently leave a mark on the negative. So if you then want to get them printed, your fingerprint will get documented for posterity. We do have a couple photos like that in the archives that I've seen. It's always kind of entertaining, but it's not necessarily something that you want. Negatives pose specific challenges because of their formats, and those vary wildly over the history of photography. They can become brittle and easily broken as plastic bases age. So encouraging them into flat sleeves is best if possible, but sometimes the curls they've been in film canisters or things like that are just impossible to get out, in which case you don't really want to force it because they will snap. Certain old film stock from the late 19th and early 20th century also is highly flammable. Cellulose nitrate produces high quality and beautiful images, but it has a very low flash point, under 130 degrees Fahrenheit. And if I remember correctly, it's somewhere in there. It's quite low. And archives tend to store it in frost-free wrappings in freezers so that it doesn't spontaneously combust. If you think about early cinemas where they would have cinema fires, this is what was going on. It was these beautiful prints done on cellulose nitrate or silver nitrate, run over hot lamps for the projector, and they would literally catch fire just from going over the lamp. So gorgeous, but extremely dangerous. Cellulose acetate, which is common to the early 20th century, is less flammable, but it will shrink and warp pretty easily, especially if exposed to heat or to moisture. It's also the film stock used for many of the early home videos, like 16 millimeter or 8 millimeter film. So you want to get those taken care of pretty quickly. I do recommend digitization for that if you can, just so that you have those in a digital format to preserve them long term. Cellulose acetate is also a challenge because it is prone to something called vinegar syndrome, where the acetate-based film stock, for reasons that we still don't fully understand, will start to degrade very quickly and turn into acetic acid. It smells vividly of balsamic vinegar. I have had the experience of opening up a box and suddenly craving a salad, which is very disconcerting. It is irreversible. It moves very, very quickly, within a number of weeks, in fact. And so if you have any hint of that, digitization is your only option. And the originals will become unusable very, very quickly. Polyester-based film, which was introduced in the 1950s, is luckily very chemically stable. So that is probably what most of us have in our families in terms of negatives. Luckily, it's going to be pretty good. It's just prone to that mechanical curling issue. So not bad. The other thing to keep in mind is that negatives are by nature light sensitive, even more than the positive prints created from film. So they should be kept in dark protective housings to prevent continued exposure. So if you put them into albums or things, make sure they're albums that close and get stored in the dark. I know that holding on to negatives is useful sometimes if you want to make extra prints, but they are kind of a challenge. The last thing to consider with photographs are things like albums. Scrapbooks and photo albums create these unique problems as they introduce the chemistry of the album pages, adhesives, and other varied materials into the mix. I've often noticed that older scrapbooks are made of heavy, slightly rough paper like construction paper. And as happens with cheaper paper materials, they are very likely to become more acidic and more prone to becoming brittle and discolored with age. Adhesives also leave stains and often lose their stickiness with time, so items will get loose, they'll fall out, and are left with permanent marks of glue, paste, or sticky tapes. And I don't know about you, but those stick-on photo corners, they never last, even if you can get them to adhere in the first place, which rarely I could not. They're a real challenge. The acidity problem is also a big thing if you're dealing with newspaper clippings, which, like the pages of the albums, are made of very cheap paper and have a high acidification risk. If you are lucky enough to have a scrapbook where all the adhesives are strong, the pages are clean and stable, I do recommend checking for item labels. We all tend to label photos on the back, but if you put them into an album, obviously you can't see the back, so make sure that they have labels next to them instead. Lastly, those photo albums so popular in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, where you have the plastic layer and the cardboard has sticky attached to it from the get-go, unfortunately, those age very, very badly. They discolor, the stickiness dies, the plastic cover starts to shred. So you want to keep an eye on them and replace them as soon as you notice discoloration or slipping items. It's only going to get worse, unfortunately. Last point I want to make about photographs is different eras of photo prints have different problems. I described some of this in regards to photo negatives, but it's true for prints as well, especially color prints. The photo on the left here is my parents at their wedding in the 1970s. And as you can see, the photo has gone very orange with time. The 70s were big on orange and brown, but this is still more orange than it should be. It's unfortunately the nature of the chemistry of the photo printing at the time. I'm not sure if it can be reversed. You would need to talk to somebody who is an expert in photography preservation and conservation. And this is where the dark storage and digital conservation efforts could be of great use. So using modern digital techniques to correct the coloration to make modern prints. So in general, dark storage for precious photo prints is going to give them their longest lifespan. Colors may still distort, but it will slow down the deterioration. And in some cases, slowing down is all we can do. And again, label your photographs, not like this. This is the wrong way to label photographs. These are both from the things I found in the archives. These are very unhelpful labels, but they are the only metadata we have for these two sets. So yeah, I did look at the Beats Me images to see if I could figure it out. There seemed to be some people up in a tree. Don't know what the context was, but here we all are. So it's funny in the moment, but not helpful long-term. Right, let's talk about artwork a little bit. One of the big things with artwork is taking care of both the medium and the base that it's on. So paper and canvas will behave differently over time. And for some art styles, the weight of the piece will become an issue as the base ages. So if it's something with very heavy amounts of paint on it, very thick paint, if the canvas it's on starts deteriorating, it's going to start sagging and pulling in different ways. So you want to be careful about that. I will also say that framing with museum glass or putting UV filters on the glass is expensive, but it's worth it in the long run. This is one of those things where a little investment is definitely going to pay off in the end. And again, keep things out of direct sunlight. It does a lot of damage. Sculpture care, like our Shakespeare bust there in the middle from the 30s or so, it's dependent on the material it's made of. So colors may change with oxidation or from environmental exposure, or there may be particular patinas that develop with handling. We've all seen, statues on campuses where like it's good luck to rub the big toe or something, and so you've got one little shiny bit on the statue. That happens. The best thing with sculpture, whatever its material, is to keep it dusted and try not to clean it with chemical agents unless advised by a professional, as those can interfere with glazes or varnishes or natural patinas that develop with time. And glazes or varnishes placed there by the artist in the first place, which are designed to protect the material. The one on the left is a watercolor from Walter S. Long, and the one on the far right is actually one of my favorite items in our collections. Ruth Hiltz was a local artist. I believe she is still with us and has reached triple digits in age. She was still with us last year anyway. But this is a series she did called Nevada Earth Colors, where she actually went around the state and collected minerals from the state and created her paints from those ground up rocks and earths and things like that. So this is painted with actual Nevada materials, which is pretty cool. With documents, as I mentioned earlier, paper remains the most stable storage medium, but not all paper is created equally. The cheaper the paper, the less likely it is to survive. So if you think about mass market paperbacks or newspaper clippings, and as how they age, they go sort of orange and brittle. That's a natural component of wood called lignin oxidizing over time. Lignin is what allows trees to grow as big as they do. But wood pulp paper doesn't have the best lifespan as a result. So the best paper for long-term storage is made of linen rag. This is what paper used to be made of. If you have the chance to handle a book from like the 18th century, you might be astonished by how flexible and clean the pages look. And that's because it's literally made of old linen rags. Linen is made from flax. Flax has no natural lignin in it because it's a grass. It doesn't need to be as stiff as trees are. But unfortunately, it's a much more expensive and time-consuming paper to produce, so wood pulp became the go-to. If you have things that you definitely want to save long-term, printing them on modern rag paper is a very good option. You used to be advised to print your resumes on that back when I was first starting out, when we were sort of on the very tail end of physical resumes for interviews. Always seemed like a strange choice to me, but it's definitely something that will last long-term. So I'm constantly surprising students at UNR with 300- and 400-year-old books that are in better condition than paperbacks from the 1990s. If you happen to have documents on parchment or vellum, the kind made of animal skin, you have other concerns. Both are exceptionally strong and durable, but they can stiffen with age. This varies based on the thickness of the pages, and they are extremely sensitive to moisture. If they get wet, they're likely to buckle and warp, and you'll have to consult with professionals to see if anything can be done to correct that. I'm actually not sure if there can, because it starts to remove the stretch that created the parchment or vellum pages in the first place. On the upside, parchment and vellum are easier to clean than paper. You rub them very, very gently, making contact but no pressure with those white high polymer erasers, and you can remove a lot of the surface staining with that. Let's move over to things that you can wear or soft things that you can hang on the wall. Ideally, textiles will be stored flat. The weight of them starts to become a problem. So if you think about if you have like family wedding dresses that you're trying to look after, or quilts hung on your wall, the weight of it starts to become an issue as it's hanging up, and it can start to tear in certain places if you're not careful. This tapestry on the wall is relatively new, but it does have loops sewn onto the back so that you can hang it more efficiently. And currently it actually is rolled up in my closet at home because it took me 13 years to make that thing. I was tired of looking at it. But it could, in theory, last quite a while if I am careful with it. The older something is, also with textiles, the more careful you want to be in laundering it. So it can be very tempting to, obviously you wouldn't throw these things into the washing machine, but you would want to launder by hand, and you would want to be very, very careful doing so. If you've got quilts, things like that, I do recommend talking to the Truckee Meadows Quilters Guild. They are extremely knowledgeable. They're our local group, and they will be able to give you pointers on looking after quilted materials or other textiles, or point you in good directions to do so. I am not a member of the group. I've worked with them a couple times and have been very impressed with them. I also do recommend wearing gloves for handling particularly old textiles, just to ensure that you're not getting any other staining on them, and so you're very, very careful in handling them. You may also want to consider purchasing archival storage materials for items like this. Maybe flat box, some tissue to wrap things in, just to ensure that they are a little bit more taken care of. In general, jewelry or other wearable accessories should be cleaned and repaired by experts. There are a lot of local jewelers. I've had experience with some of them myself, and solid metal will do okay in those ultrasonic cleaners you can buy or that you see videos of on TikTok and Instagram. But if there are any stones, enamel, adhesives, you want to avoid those for sure, because those can very seriously damage materials. So when in doubt, you really want to talk to an expert in this case. And just know that many jewelry stores offer cleaning and repair services. So it's an option to keep in mind. And they also can have items revamped, reset, or otherwise updated to fit an individual's style. It's always fun if there's a piece that you want to hold on to, but maybe your ancestor's ring size was like half the size of yours and you don't know what to do with it. They could turn it into a pendant for you, things like that. We're getting into my area of expertise here. General storage advice for books involves the same message about light exposure, especially sunlight, and of course being careful about moisture. If you want to dust your books, I recommend doing so with a large soft paintbrush just off the top. It's amazing how much dust they collect, truly. And you can only really see it if they're the kind that are gilded on the edges. Otherwise, you don't necessarily notice it until you open it. But it's something to keep in mind in terms of keeping things clean. There are also some handling recommendations for older books. You don't want to open the covers more than they actually want to open. Some of them have become very stiff with time, and so you can rest them into a pillow or other kind of cushion to support covers that won't lay flat. Try not to crack the spines. I know it's really tempting, especially with large paperbacks, things like that, but those create breaks in the spine where the book can come apart more easily over time. It's literally breaking the glue that holds the spine together. While older books are stitched, many from the post-World War II period are made with what is, in my opinion, the ironic name of perfect binding. This means that the pages are made into the text block entirely with glue. There is no stitching at all. They are very cheap to produce. This is where you get the mass market paperback from. But they are significantly less durable than their older cousins as a result. The cheapness of the paper, the nature of the glue means that pages are very easy to fall out. And they're hard to look after. So if you, for instance, maybe have a sci-fi collection at home, this is something to keep in mind. As I mentioned, also the pages darken and become brittle, the glue fails, and in general, the whole things start to disintegrate if you look at them too hard. So they're a challenge, but they're wonderful things that we all have on our shelves as well. Hardcover books are generally stronger than their paperback cousins, but they are also prone to wear and tear from handling, particularly at the joints where the cover meets the spine. You get a lot of mechanical wear and tear. The end papers will start to split. Sometimes you'll get the covers detaching, things like that. Please do not repair things with Scotch tape or any other sort of pressure-based tape. Those do not last. They also stain the materials and can cause a significant amount of damage when you're trying to remove them later. Use plant-based paste, like you can get methyl cellulose, which is literally just cellulose that you mix with water and nice a water-based paint, water-based adhesive, and strips of thin Japanese paper like washi in a white or undyed color. You can use those to do repairs very easily. Or you can find a fabric-based library repair tape from a reputable supplier. If you don't feel comfortable attempting a repair and don't want to outsource the problem to a book restorer or bookbinder to do it for you, because that can be quite expensive depending on who you're working with, you have two easy options for stabilizing the book. First, you can create a box for it out of acid-free folders or cardstock, as you see in the central picture here. We do that quite a lot at UNR and in every special collections library. It's a very easy way of ensuring that a book with, say, detached covers or deteriorating leather bindings is both held in place in its one piece and does not damage any books that are next to it as well. Especially those deteriorating leather bindings, they just rub off on everything. You learn very quickly not to wear white shirts in my field. It washes out, but you just feel gross for the rest of the day when it gets on you. The second option, especially if the covers have become detached, is to tie them gently but firmly into place with strips of fabric. I recommend the flat kind of plain shoelace or strips of undyed cotton for this. You can also buy special linen tape, like the one you see there for our 1617 King James Bible, which, I mean, this thing is like sort of yay big. It weighs like 15, 20 pounds. And the covers have completely come off. So you just tie it into place. You make sure that the knot is in front of what we call the foredge, which is the part that is opposite the spine. So it's where the book opens. That way the knot is not going to rub on anything and cause more damage. You also want to make sure that you're tying it in a way that is firm, but is not going to leave any kind of pressure mark. I can talk in complete paragraph. I could do this entire thing just on the books and didn't think that was going to be for everybody. Analog media. Analog media is the main area where I vigorously encourage digitization. While we don't fully understand how a lot of 20th century data formats are going to age in the long term, and by long term, I mean generations or centuries, we already know that most films and tapes are not going to survive in any usable format. I've discussed some of the issues with film stock already as regards photographs, but it holds true for home videos shot on film as well. Even though we don't know how digital media formats will age over generations, digitizing old film will buy you time as other solutions emerge. Obviously, vinyl records are mostly prone to mechanical damage, wear and tear, scratches, cracks. So looking after a turntable, if you're going to play these things, to ensure that it's functioning properly, has the right kind of needle, before playing these records will reduce risks of accident, and of course, handling them carefully. I understand that audiophiles are going to have strong opinions about analog versus digital sound. I'm not stepping into that particular minefield. I have no particular horse in that race. But if, for instance, what you've got is a recording of a family member or something that's very important to you, an important event, digitization to create a backup copy at least is well worth looking into. Magnetic tape, things you find on VHS or cassette tapes, has already proved to be a preservation nightmare. The plastic base ages the way plastic inevitably does, losing its strength and either snapping or stretching more easily than it should. But it's the magnetic layer that actually stores the data that's the biggest problem. If the tapes are not regularly wound and rewound, the layers start sticking together. And then when they're used again, bits of the magnetic tape flake off, literally losing data. VHS tapes, cassette tapes, and the others are at high risk and should be prioritized for this kind of digital preservation. They are a huge, huge problem already. Yes?
If you could take that vinyl and wrap around something, what would it be wrapped around to stop it from having to round and re-round? Can you wrap it on something?
I mean, it's already wound.
Well, what I'm saying is, you just spool the tape.
Yeah.
You put a layer between each plastics. What layer? Another plastic? Another fabric?
No, I mean like putting it in a tape player and running it so that it winds on the two spools.
Yes.
I don't know if there's any sort of interleaving that can be done. I've not had much experience with this particular area.
Just an idea, so you don't have to spend time having to rewind and fast forward rewind.
Yeah.
Wrap something between.
It's possible. I don't know. Now, a little bit of content warning if anybody's squeamish. We have this. I'm going to talk a little bit about pests. The first day I worked in an archive, I was an intern with Yosemite National Park's archives, and don't get excited, it wasn't that fun. My supervisor warned us all about the risk of bubonic plague and hantavirus from working in archives. Those are quite rare, but it is true that when materials are stored in attics or basements, rodents can get in. They nest, they defecate, then the records become a biohazard. If you are going through your family things, find any sign of rodent activity, stop what you're doing, wash your hands very, very well, and either find a professional assistance or at least wear gloves and a mask. This is very much for your protection. We don't know where they've been, these little creatures, and I definitely recommend speaking to a professional as soon as you can. Spiders are also very common. They are not fun to encounter unexpectedly, but they're not a huge preservation concern unless they're nesting, in which case it's mostly just gross and gives you the crawls for the rest of the day. But there are insects that cause significant problems. Some, like silverfish, consume the paper and glue in books. Others, like carpet beetles and termites, will eat through textiles, wood, paper, and just about anything else they can get their jaws into. As you see in these two books here, on the left, that is what happens when you've got a termite infestation. And on the right, that is what a bookworm hole looks like. Bookworms are quite real. They are not actually worms. They are the larvae of a variety of different insects, mostly beetles. And they do leave holes, which can be useful for reconnecting bits of manuscripts that have been disbound and sold off, because they serve like a fingerprint, but they also leave giant holes in the middle of things. So if your home has had problems with insect activity in the past, this is something you want to pay attention to, you're particularly concerned about some items, you can set up simple and discrete glue traps to check at regular intervals to see if anything has turned up, and then you can take proactive measures as a result. It's also worth including your treasures in any disaster preparedness work that you do for your home. Some of you may have experienced fire evacuations, flooding, earthquakes, major storms, things like that. So knowing what you've got, where it's stored, and what is sort of prioritized for evacuating with you is worth knowing. And also if anything might be potentially a biohazard when you start recovering your possessions. Some book bindings from the 19th century have hazardous materials in them that are only a problem if they get wet. Things like mercury to create vermilion dye, or lead, things like that, just to be aware of. Not going to cause you any significant damage unless you eat the book, in which case we have other problems. But things to be aware of when you are recovering materials. I'm going to start wrapping up by pointing you towards some useful and mostly free resources for approaching preservation yourself and for finding expert help if you want to pursue repairs and restorations. I've also printed out a basic pointers guide from Preservation Week. It's on the back near the table where you came in. I've made use of all of these resources at some point or another for education, for taking care of materials. So all of these I have vetted, and I can say that they are definitely reliable. So this talk is happening today as part of Preservation Week, which is itself an annual creation of the American Library Association, of which I am a member. There is a website for it with resources, including free webinars, lightning talks on a variety of topics, and suggestions for handling specific situations and categories of materials. There are also resources in languages other than English, if that is something that you or your family members need, so that can be quite useful. If you want to pursue some of the preservation techniques on your own, my department mostly buys supplies from three major archival supply businesses, Hollinger Metal Edge, Gaylord, and Talus. You may see archival quality or similar labels on items at, say, Staples or Home Depot, but please be careful with those. It's not a regulated term. It's not like labeling produce as organic, where there are actually regulations on this. I haven't found any offenders yet. I actually purchased a pen that checks the pH of paper just to see for myself whether they were accurate. So far, everything's been fine with the archival label, but you can't be 100% certain unless you buy from reputable and vetted archival supply stores. These are the three big ones. The downside to that is they do have kind of a stranglehold on things, so they charge accordingly. Depending on your needs, it might be worth it in the long term, but buyer beware and all that. when I was at the American Bookbinders Museum, actually, I consulted with somebody from the American Institute of Conservation, a metal specialist. Their Find an Expert tool is publicly available, which is really wonderful. You can search by material type, wood, metal, textiles, etc., and find someone to advise you or even do the restoration work if you are able to pay them to do so. From what I've seen, most of them work in museums or universities and are highly qualified in their areas of specialty. What we had here was a machine that would rule lines on paper, and we had some spare pieces for them that were absolutely black. They were just absolutely encrusted with years of machine oil and dirt that had turned into this solid layer. But when I turned one over, I noticed that there was gilt on it and a little bit of color underneath the dark. And so I contacted the specialist for advice on cleaning them without removing the 19th century paintwork. And so after weeks of playing with cotton swabs and mineral spirits, I was able to reveal this gorgeous gilding and dark red paint on them, which was really quite satisfying to see that come out. So, as I said, experts might charge for their time as advisors or for doing restoration work. But if you have something particularly rare or important to you, or just want to put resources into ensuring a special item's long-term survival, this really is a wonderful tool to have available. Let's see, a couple other ones that I talked about. So I talked about American Institute for Conservation, their Find an Expert tool. I highly recommend it. And finally, the Northeast Document Conservation Center also has some free resources, kind of similar to what ALA has, but they're fun to sort of wander through. They mostly focus on paper-based stuff, as they are a document conservation center, whereas ALA has a wider range of material types, but these are like the top people in their field in America. So it's nice to have the free resources from them, benefit from their expertise. And finally, at the risk of ending on a shameless plug, Special Collections and University Archives at UNR might be a good home or able to help you find a home for something that is important to you, you want it to survive, but you no longer wish to take care of it yourself. We do have a firm collection scope, so we can't accept everything, but we can often point you towards another institution that might be a good fit. And that's what I've got. What questions do folks have? And when the questions run out, there are some, for the people who are here in person, there are some snacks set up in the synagogue library down the hall.
How about, excuse me, go ahead. No, go ahead. How about the faux, fake leather?
Do you mind using the microphone for the live stream?
What about faux? Fake leather, is there a good way of preserving that other than just a simple wiping down with leather cleaner or not leather cleaner?
I would treat it similar to plastics because that tends to be largely what it's made of. So just, definitely being careful what cleaner you use. I don't know if leather cleaner is the best one. I don't have a whole lot of experience with the cleaning side of things myself, other than those metal pieces you saw. But that's one where folks, if you go to someplace like Mill End that sells fabrics of a variety of types, they might be able to give you some advice. Yeah.
Do we have a question up here?
With regards to newspapers and other things that have a high lignin content, do you recommend in certain cases doing a deacidification bath? I've heard of those, and I'm not sure that they can be done at home, and I don't know if they are particularly reputable.
I think it sort of goes in and out of fashion. Not sure where we're currently at with newsprint. What I generally recommend is interleaving it with acid-free paper, so that can provide a buffer to the other materials it's next to. So if you've got something that's bound album, that can add significantly to its width, and it can put a strain on the binding, so you may need to undo the binding on that. But if you've just got loose clippings, just file them with acid-free paper in between, or fold the acid-free paper around them to create a little mini folder.
Okay.
That's what I'd go with.
Would you recommend just plain acid-free, or look for something that's pH buffered?
Either is good. Depends on your budget, really.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
And the online people are welcome to ask questions too.
So I'm somebody who has become kind of overwhelmed by my digitized stuff. I have like a Google Drive that I cannot find anything in. So do you just have any kind of like basic tips for organizing your digital files?
Consistent naming conventions are the big one. And we love a hierarchical folder tree. So you have strong subsets of folders and grouping things in the way that makes most sense to you. In terms of actual organization, it's going to be what works best for your brain. There is no hard and fast rule, but definitely consistency is the key. And don't be afraid to create many levels in the system. People organize their personal books or their music in a way that makes most sense to them. You organize your closet in a way so you can find things. As a librarian by training, I have people come up and apologize to me for the fact that they, arrange their books by color of the cover or by height or whatever. And I don't care as long as you can find things. That's the whole point. So if you can't find things, then you might need to figure out a system that works for you. It might take a bit of trial and error, but ultimately the goal is to be able to find stuff again.
Any questions from the live stream, Tommy? Okay, any other questions here?
Okay, yeah, we'll come back to me first. Okay. And then
Fight.
Is there anything just other than what being able to digitize stuff has given us? Is there anything in the technology or coming up in the technology that people in your field are really excited about with its possibilities?
I am really excited about the applications of machine learning to have computers be able to transcribe handwriting. It's something that's being worked on right now. I know that there are some systems that are starting to be able to do it, the way that you can have documents that are text searchable. That's really what I want, but with our digitized handwritten materials. The problem at the moment is that the sample sizes required are too big for most of the collections we have, or maybe we have like a single letter written by somebody. Whereas right now, I think it needs, many, many more samples to be able to determine the handwriting. But I think that's going to be a game changer when that comes in. The wonderful thing about having digitized materials and archives is it does mean that people who are not able to come in person are able to do their research as well. And having the text searchable factor will mean that it is more ADA compliant, and that people who need a screen reader, for instance, will be able to access those materials as well. So I'm really looking forward to that being a part of our factors.
So since we are in a synagogue, I'm a little bit curious, is there anything special that does or should go into preserving the Torah?
Well, it's
Here.
parchment. It's animal skin. So while light exposure is less of a problem for them, just because of the nature of the material and the inks that tend to be used, it is prone to the same issues that parchment and vellum have, which is that warping that I talked about and becoming very stiff. The good news is ours get used so much that they get a lot of regular motion to them. They don't have a chance to really firm up in one position in the same way that you might get with like a book binding that doesn't get opened more than once every 20 years. But if that stuff warps, I mean, it's like plastic. You almost can't get it undone again. But it's exceptionally durable material. Like it's those things are going to outlast all of us by many, many generations. It's probably the wood that you're more worried about. Yes.
If it does start to warp, when it does start to warp, is there a way to reverse that process?
I'm not sure, honestly. We have some vellum book bindings in our collections that have experienced that. And I think that they basically would have to be almost taken back down to the process of making vellum in the first place, which involves a lot of soaking and stretching and scraping, which would then effectively destroy anything written on it. So I'm not there may be things that can be done, but I'm not confident that there are. Anything else, or is it time for snacks?
Perfect. Thank you, Elspeth. She also brought some of her personal collection books if anyone wants to take a look. And yeah,
Fire gloves?
Nope.
thank you again.
But be nice to the Jane Austen. It's fragile.